There are elections, and then there are elections that tell you something is changing. Michigan has just given America one of those moments. A Muslim, an Egyptian American, a doctor, a progressive, Abdul El-Sayed. He has won the Democratic primary for the US Senate. And if he wins the final battle in November, he will become the first Muslim senator in American history. But stop here. This is not just a story about a Muslim candidate, not just about Michigan, and certainly not just about the Senate seat. This is a story about changing America. This is tonight's The Pivot. I'm Ali Furqan. Let us begin. Al-Sayed was not expected to have an easy ride. His opponent, Haley Stevens, had powerful political backing and enormous outside spending behind her. The American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, and allied pro-Israeli groups were heavily involved in the race. Broader outside spending in this contest reaches roughly $60 to $80 million. This is roughly 22 billion Pakistani rupees. Just imagine 22 billion rupees spent around one Senate primary. Millions were spent on advertisements, millions spent trying to define Al-Sayed, and millions spent trying to stop his political rise. But Michigan voters had another answer. Al-Sayed won, and that raises a much bigger question. Can money still guarantee political victory in America? Because Al-Sayed's campaign was built around something money cannot simply purchase. Grassroots power, volunteers, young voters, digital campaigning, and direct engagement with ordinary Americans. The lesson? Money can buy advertisements, but it cannot always buy voters. And then comes the second earthquake. Gaza. For decades, unconditional support for Israel has one of the strongest pillars of American foreign policy. But that consensus is now under pressure, especially among younger, progressive, and left-leaning Democrats. Al-Sayed has openly challenged US military support for Israel and made Gaza part of his political message. And this is important. We should not say that America has suddenly become anti-Israel. That would be simplistic. The real question is different. Is unconditional support for Israel becoming politically harder to define inside parts of the Democratic Party? Michigan suggests perhaps yes. Now, look at the candidate. Al-Sayed is not a traditional Washington politician. He is a physician, a public health expert, a former public health officer, and an outsider. And he understood something about modern politics. The television screen is no longer enough. The smartphone is the new campaign headquarters. Social media, grassroots organizing, young voters, direct communication. This is how new political movements are being built. Now, look at the candidate. Al-Sayed is not a traditional Washington politician. He's a physician, a public health expert, a former public health officer, and an outsider. And he understood something about modern politics. Television screen is no longer enough. Smartphone is the new campaign headquarters. Social media, grassroots organizing, young voters, direct communication. This is how new political movements are being built. And this brings us to another name. Zohran Mamdani, New York, Michigan. Different elections, different offices, but perhaps the same larger story. A new generation of Muslim immigrants, minority, young and progressive Americans is moving from the margin towards the center of political power. They are no longer saying, listen to us. They are saying, vote for us. And then let us go on. But here is where we must be careful. Al-Sayed has won the primary, not the Senate seat. The real battle comes in November when he faces Republican Mike Rogers. And that election will tell us whether this was simply a progressive upset or the beginning of a larger political transformation. Because if Al-Sayed wins, America will witness something historic. A Muslim senator entering Washington at a time when America's politics on Israel, Gaza, Iran, immigration, and America's role in the world are all being fiercely debated. And perhaps this is the real story. For decades, American politics asked who has the money. Michigan is asking who has the people. For decades, some issues were considered politically untouchable. Michigan is asking, are those red lines moving? And for decades, Muslims and minorities were often treated as voting blocs. Now, they are becoming candidates, organizers, and potentially lawmakers. So, is this a revolution? Not yet. November is still coming. The primary was the earthquake. The general election will tell us whether it was a tremor or the beginning of a political shift in America. Because if Al-Sayed wins, the history books will not simply say a Muslim became a senator. They may say American politics began to change. I'm Ali Furqan, and this was The Pivot.